Hello and welcome at Book Lovers Companion. My name is Edith, and dear listeners, the chattering teacup is preparing for a stay at a health resort for her back, for her shoulders, and she's also taking care of our dear CEO. So it will be me, but not just me, of course. I'm here with a lovely guest from across the pond. Joining me for this episode is Audrey Gale. Hello, Audrey, and welcome at Book Lovers Companion.
Hello, Edith. Thank you so much for having me today.
Thanks for being here. We are here to talk about your medical thriller, The Human Trial, which came out in 2023.
Yeah, toward the end of 2023.
Quite a ride. I'll always leave it to our guests to tell our listeners about their book without giving too much away, of course. Before we dive right in, what can you tell our listeners about your book?
So the Human Trial is based on some personal health-related experiences that I had. And it started to feel like the universe was nudging me. You need to pay attention to this. You need to pay attention to this. And finally, I paid attention to this. I can talk about those experiences, but to talk about the book is, first of all, inspired by real scientists who worked mainly in the 30s. It's based on their actual discoveries made at that time. And it's what I had witnessed in my profound medical experiences that I had to understand. So in the fictional world, I created two scientists based again on those scientists I researched. One, a physicist who creates an unsurpassed microscope. And the other, a medical doctor who attains his degree from Harvard. They're both at Harvard. Attains his degree in pathology, a specialization in pathology. And they team up using the physicist, his name is Adam Wakefield, using his incredible, powerful microscope. And they are able, for maybe the first time ever, to study live microbes, live diseases, and look at the microbes not in a state of being frozen by chemicals, being preserved for future study, but actually as they live. And that led them to understand that the vibrational nature of disease, like the vibrational nature of all of creation, including us, could be zeroed in on. And when they zeroed in on it, they discovered something else. They discovered that using that vibration, if they could recreate it exactly enough, it actually overwhelmed the disease microbes and killed them off. The beauty of this discovery was that it didn't touch any healthy cells or organs or tissues in your body, and your body naturally passes these dead microbes out over time just through natural processes. So anyway, our two scientists are working together, and they come across this incredible discovery. They're expecting accolades and wild acceptance from the medical establishment at the time in the 30s, and instead they come up against a brick wall. The medical establishment didn't like this discovery. They feared it. It was the Great Depression, after all, so things were economically very unstable as it was, and they perceived it as a threat. And so instead of the accolades, they actually come up against that brick wall. And not too long into the story, Dr. Randall Archer, MD, starts to fear for his life. So that's sort of the rough outline. I know you read the book. Did I miss anything?
No, perfectly summarized. But your characters, let's start with Dr. Archer. it wasn't a given from the start that he was going to be that successful doctor.
It certainly was not. And it really is the overshadowing trait of his character. He came from a semi-violent, um, blue-collar home where, because he looked different than everybody else, and he was different, he was brilliant off the charts. He was always not he was never accepted by his family and always suspected of, thinking he's superior, et cetera, et cetera. I think we've all unfortunately had experiences where someone says, "Who do you think you are?" kind of thing. And that was the first 16 years of his life. It was tough. And yet he was believed in by his high school counselor. High school counselor had a connection at Harvard. He'd already finished high school at 16, so she put the word out, and he attained a complete scholarship to Harvard all the way through medical school and his specialization.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact of the matter is, and I think this also is who we are, the fact of matter is, if you start out kind of feeling unaccepted or being nervous about fitting in, I think that stays with you, and it certainly stays with this character. I would describe Dr. Archer as brilliant, first and foremost, a little insecure throughout his life, never really finding that place of total acceptance. And that drives him in ways that we might not always find admirable, but understandable. I had a review that said, "Well, your characters may not be necessarily all likable, but they certainly are relatable." And I really I think we all can relate to this in some degree.
Absolutely. Glad you mentioned that he is not always likable. Absolutely true. But on the other hand, it's understandable. It's understandable, especially when you think where he comes from, where he came from, what, like you said, what drove him or what drives him during the book. It's also a little bit with his wife. There's also a certain kind of drive or a need to succeed on her end, because her background is the complete opposite. And yet, at the same time, she has this drive to show she can do it.
I think it's really interesting. It was interesting to me to be working on these characters because they do come at a similar need to find out who they are and prove themselves in the world. But she comes from vast privilege and an important name, and it goes back to the beginning of the United States, and she has kind of all the privileges, and he has none. And yet they relate for two reasons. They both have to know what they can do and who they are in the big world. And I think they also kind of like each other for all the things that they aren't that their partner is. So Dr. Archer relates to Elizabeth. Her name is Elizabeth Parrish. He relates to Elizabeth because she has privilege, because she has style and wealth and all those things, that he thinks that would be the way to fit in. I need to be that. And she, because she is refuting her family's expectations, Dr. Archer fits in perfectly. It doesn't matter that he has a degree from Harvard. It's that he's from the wrong side of the tracks. And that's part of his charm for her. I just kind of relate to all of this.
Yes.
I don't know what I'm telling you about. But I just like that. It was fascinating for me.
Yeah. And on one hand, the absolute perfect fit. The more he gets into his studies, though, the relationship itself comes under threat by him being so driven, doesn't it, in a way?
his one characteristic, his one overarching trait, the need to find how to fit in, how to feel like I fit. It ends up being a boomerang. She can relate to it, but you know, he's in a marriage now. He's in a relationship now. He needs to understand how that aspect of his life needs nurturing as well. But he's too driven. He's too single-minded. He can't really see what's happening in his marriage until maybe it's too late.
Yeah, and his first reaction when he didn't get his dream job was a bit, well, for me, it was, oh dear, poor. He would be ready to say, oh yeah, well, I can't get what I want. I can't fulfill my dream. So maybe sacrifice a relationship.
I don't think he felt he had to do that. I think because she also was part of the victimization of getting him out of consideration for his dream job. They also her family also included her in that. They didn't like what she was doing with this man, and so she too lost her dream job. And so the two of them were in that together. That was a good thing. They were stuck in that problem together. And so that gave them the strength, along with Dr. Wakefield. He's the PhD in physics. He's not a MD.
Yeah.
Along with Dr. Wakefield providing an entree to them at the university he was then working at, they decided, okay, if he can do it, we can at least try. And so off they go to a new life and a new job, and it seems to be working quite well for a while.
It does. And you mentioned it when you told our listeners about the plot of your book, the medical establishment. A lot of people have their fingers in that pie, or at least in the university where Dr. Archer works at Harvard, and the influence they have, how things work out, and also in the end, how he is able to go on with his studies. The danger. His friend doesn't really. Oh, let's put it that way. He underestimates it. He doesn't believe him. He thinks him paranoid.
Exactly.
What is going on? Let's say behind the scenes of these institutions.
Again, that was an interesting way for me to consider a privileged background versus an absolutely unprivileged background. The privileged background would tend to give you this sense of, well, people can't be that nasty, and life is good, and I have an expectation of good, and I'm an optimist because life has kind of worked out without me thinking a lot about it. And yet, Dr. Archer, who seems cynical to his privileged research partner, as well as his privileged wife, he's from a place where you don't know what's around the corner and bad things happen and you really need to be prepared. And he tried to be prepared his entire life. And, life takes turns and twists, and we'll all end up surprised, as every one of my main characters is in this book. Surprised.
Can it be said that Dr. Archer has a more realistic view of life, especially when we think about the time your book is set in? Great Depression and the banks that crashed, and him not coming from such a privileged background, having experience with all the things you have been lacking, education and opportunities.
Did you say amoralistic?
No. A more realistic.
Realistic. Oh, I thought, well, amoral, I like that.
No,
Oh,
no.
I think I guess he like, I'm an optimist, so it's sort of hard for me to imagine going through life cynically.
Hmm.
It's like, why would you get up every morning? But I do think he had his feet on the ground, and maybe especially during that time period when everybody in the world was negatively affected by the Great Depression. Um, there were people were losing their homes and their farms and jobs, and these tent cities were popping up all over the United States anyway, and people who were at the top of their game, head of the big companies, really successful, wealthy, etc., were jumping off of roofs, and so in the sense that it was a particular time of real challenge. I think Archer had a clearer view.
Hmm.
He had a clear view of what people do when they're desperate, as opposed to his wife and his research partner, Dr. Wakefield, who really hadn't seen the underbelly of life, maybe
Hmm.
until the Depression.
It comes quite starkly across when you describe in the book their journey from Boston to California, and when they arrive and Dr. Wakefield asks him, "Yeah, how was your journey?" and the different view they had on the journey. When Elizabeth describes, yes, the beauty of America and it's so wonderful and all these different landscapes, and then Dr. Archer said, "Didn't you see this?" Those derelict cities, the people suffering, and those abandoned farms, and so on.
Yeah, that I loved using that train trip, which in the day was miraculous. It took 3 days to go from Boston to Los Angeles, which to them seemed like, a miracle.
Yeah.
And she again, she's sort of open to what's around her. That's her sort of innate optimism, her expecting good things. She sees, the beauty of the Great Plains. She sees the snow-capped peaks of the Rockies in the distance as they grow bigger and bigger and bigger, and she's just mesmerized by it all. He, on the other hand, gloms onto the Dust Bowl. Now, the Dust Bowl was definitely part of the 30s. It actually started sooner than the Depression, and it was because of the way farms and ranches were operating then that depleted the grasses that held the topsoil in place. And so during the Dust Bowl, all that topsoil was being picked up by the air and carried everywhere. And life was ended as it was known. The farms and the ranches failed, the animals died, things were abandoned in their place, and they were called Okies, but they were really from Kansas and Nebraska and so on, as well as Oklahoma. They all migrated west. They had nothing to stay for, and they had to find a better life. That's how California got developed.
Yeah, I mean, it's always like you said, this picture you painted and he painted to when he talks about what he saw during this train ride. I mean, it's devastating, of course, and it's also devastating for them in a way that they got a teeny tiny glimpse of what is going on in the country at the moment, but not what other people experienced at the time. But there's also the question, I suppose, what is important at the moment? Where do we, or where shall we put the money? Question mark. And how much influence or is wielded by those who still have money? Like you said, a lot of people lost a lot of money, yet at the same time, a lot of people kept their money, even profited maybe to
Of
some degree.
course. Of
Certainly,
course.
they always do. In a way, there are always some people who profit, and how they wield the power and how they preserve the power they have and the influence? How far are they willing to go, able to go?
Yeah. That is definitely a big theme in this book because the powers that be now understand, I give them that they are all feeling threatened. It's a very rough time out there. But the powers that be are so threatened that they will basically do anything to preserve the status quo. And that's not unusual. I think we find that kind of everywhere we look. The status quo. The people who have it and wield the power don't want to give it up.
Mhm.
And so that's not unique to the Depression, but it was probably exacerbated by the Depression. And that's where the medical establishment is looking at these amazing discoveries and going, wait a minute, am I going to be out of a job? Is my financial situation going to be affected? How can I understand what this will be like for me? And maybe I better just stick with what I know. Let's just keep things as they are. Status quo.
Me, me, me.
Me, me, me. It seems to be a human trait.
Yeah, this egotistical trait where we all we think about is us and don't care about other people, and especially in the field of medicine, one wonders because we usually have this idea of people in the field of medicine taking care of others and being inspired to help others, and that's what's driving them. Yet there's always a part of people or a fraction, they only care for themselves.
They're still human, you know? And I think the way we rationalize things comes to play here. I mean, they could say, I have my family to protect. No, that's a big rationalization. That's used a lot. I have my family to protect. I have my industry to protect. I have my cohorts and my fellow workers to protect. There's a lot of, we're really, really good at convincing ourselves of just about anything we want to be convinced of. And then throw in some complicating detail like the Great Depression.
Mm,
We're even better at rationalizing in those troubled times, I think. I think
mm,
that's a human trait. And there's not a lot of folks that I have personally found who spend a lot of time introspecting and really looking at it from every angle they can find and trying to come to a reasoned conclusion. I don't see that a lot. I
mm,
hope you do, but I don't.
mm. Yeah, maybe I have a too cynical point of view. Maybe we should heed Miss Marple's point of view more often. Expect the worst, and you won't be surprised or disappointed by the way people behave.
Uh-huh.
You know.
That.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And I'm thinking we said or you said again there is this collaboration between medicine and physics, between those two friends, these two departments. There is always money involved. Of course there is. And one thinks of a more recent event or yeah, or company. You probably know where I'm going with this. Elizabeth Holmes,
Oh
who,
my goodness.
yeah, changing the way medicine is conducted or analytics of blood samples is done, and a lot of money, and in the end Miss Holmes is in jail.
Yeah, but I bet her money is safely offshore somewhere.
I'm convinced. I'm absolutely convinced. I'm not worried about that. No.
She isn't either.
No. So no. I'm quite certain that as soon as she's out, we don't have to
Yeah.
worry about that woman.
That's a good example. It's a good example. And did she start out thinking I'm going to the Western term buffalo, I'm going to fool everybody. I wonder if you just wonder how that evolved. I can imagine an evolution where she truly was thinking she was going to do something incredible for the world, for the world's health, and then something didn't quite work, and she couldn't get it to work. And then did she decide, well, I got this far. I can pretty much
Yeah.
take it where I want. And, did they start out being evil or did they fall into it? I mean, that's a good character study, and that's what makes writing fiction fun.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Makes you wonder because I read this book by the journalist. I think he was from the Wall Street Journal who researched the case of Elizabeth Holmes and her company. Maybe there were good intentions at the beginning, but once the train got started, it couldn't be stopped. And maybe also the fact that people like her have a certain personality trait that makes it impossible for them to admit, no, we are not going to make it.
That they were wrong, that they made a mistake, that
Yeah.
there's a problem. Now that I recognize, that I see in people around me. I recognize that trait. Um, the immediate switch to victimhood.
Hmm.
It can't be me. I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. It was him or her, whoever was around me. It's always something outward that victimizes people like that. And that is so sad because they lie to themselves and then they lie to the world and everything gets disturbed. But that's not an uncommon trait, unfortunately.
Yeah, especially when people are extremely successful and in certain areas. Do you need a certain kind of personality to succeed? I suppose one does.
I suppose one does. Tunnel vision, driven, nothing's going to stop me. That can lead into all sorts of problems. But I think to attain great success in any field, you do have to have some kind of, I'd like to leave it at determination, but
Hmm.
it might take more than that. It might take that absolute focus. I'm going to go from A to B and I will get there.
Also, a certain amount of ruthlessness.
Mm, yeah, I suppose that's true too. Yep. Stepping on whomever you have to step on. I need to create a character that explores this more. Maybe in my sequel. The
Yeah,
ruthlessness. I think that as a thought.
yeah, I think so because when you look at certain professions, I think you do need that, or people have this kind of personality trait that makes them the success they are.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. I mean, the world is so competitive and it's changing so rapidly, and trying to stay abreast of all of that. It would take a certain kind of, I like to call it tunnel vision, but I suppose really ruthlessness is an aspect.
It also comes to mind now that we had his friend Wakefield, who works in a specialized field in physics, but at the same time, when your book is set, you have Oppenheimer, and he's also a driven man. He's a genius, a driven man, and it's not about bringing forth possibilities or things to help people, but maybe from his
Again,
point of view.
there's some rationalization there,
Yeah,
though, in
yeah.
the whole atomic, that whole energy focus during World War II was because of the belief, and I really don't know if it's true or not, that the Nazis were way ahead of us
Mm.
on this score, and the feeling that if they got a bomb before we did, that they would not hesitate to use it. Now, we'll never know. I'll never know. I mean, perhaps there's history written about this field, but I like you bringing up the physics and the medicine because my two scientists embody something really fundamental, in my opinion, of what's potentially wrong with medicine today.
Hmm.
So 125 years ago, Einstein came along, Max Planck, Niels Bohr. These were the great names of early quantum physics. And the essence of quantum physics, as far as I used it in my book, is that there is no solid in the universe. That everything at its most fundamental basis is vibrating energy, or to be more scientific, electromagnetic energy. So if that were proven to most reasonable people 125 years ago, it seems very suspicious to me. And this is one of the reasons I got into writing this book. Why hasn't medicine looked at that seriously? Um, it's still not considered seriously in traditional Western medicine. Um, and yet, what we're saying is if we, as part of creation, are part of that spectrum of electromagnetic energy that defines everything you can see, touch, imagine, smell, whatever, then wouldn't our disease states be one aspect of an energetic vibrating body? And wouldn't a healthy body be a different aspect of a healthy vibrating body?
Hmm.
So that's what these scientists that we researched. And then I also had a very important physicist who helped me, was my advisor on the physics aspect. I also had a very important pathologist advise me on medical pathology, and I got to spend time in his lab and so on. So I got experts to advise me, and um, and yes, in fact, I think it will be important in the future for all of medicine, like acupuncture has always, like homeopathy, like all sorts of quote unquote primitive cultures have used vibration, have used drumming, have used music, have used meditation to change your vibration. So our scientists in this book, it's a little less woo woo. They discovered the frequency of live disease microbes. And each disease had its own frequency, a signature frequency. And they learned how to recreate that. And recreating that caused the disease microbes to be overwhelmed and they die off. So, I believe that we're seeing this. And I also have, I interview medical practitioners of every ilk on a monthly basis. And when you get right down to it, they're really all talking about this very thing, our vibration, our frequency, our natural state of energy, which you can raise or lower through such things as meditation, through certainly acupuncture is the clear use of the meridians, which are the streams of energy that run through our bodies, which can be detected by electrical equipment today. So they're not. It's not a fantasy. It's a reality.
Yeah, I mean, not diving so deep into the physics part of this, but it is known that the purring of a cat can lower your blood pressure.
Uh-huh, uh-huh, uh-huh.
I mean,
Absolutely. It's something. Yeah. It's it's like great music.
mm,
I went to a concert on Sunday, and it was great music, and it brings up emotions, you don't even know
yeah,
what they're about. It puts you in a place of love. I guess the word is love. You're just feeling love,
yeah,
and you're feeling relation to those around you and feeling part of the bigger whole.
absolutely. There was this case a few last year or something, it was on social media, I think, about this ballet dancer in her 80s, 90s who has dementia. But when she heard this special piece, she started to move. She did remember that from her youth. I find it most interesting, fascinating, what the brain is able to do, even with patients like that.
And muscle memory, perhaps. And
Yeah,
that was
absolutely.
a happy place for her, and she gravitated back.
Also, the question of smell. You know, you mentioned it before. When we smell things we remember, we can bring up memories long buried in our mind.
Exactly. It can trigger memories very effectively, the smell.
Yeah, absolutely. And how much or how long did you research? I mean, how long did it take you until you felt I can put it in my book, I can write about it? Because sometimes when we talk to authors who have done quite some extensive research, it's always the question of falling down the rabbit hole of researching and never getting out of this certain hole.
You know, I think you do have to love research, especially a fiction writer, because fiction writers really have to create a believable reality. Nonfiction writers get to report on what's out there. So I do love the research. What really happened is I quit my corporate banking career after some 21 years, and I tried to write this book. And I've sent it out to agents, and I got feedback all over the map. I had no concept of what they were telling me because no one told me the same thing twice. So I decided, okay, I think I need some training in this area. So that's when I went back to school and I got my master's in writing at University of Southern California. And to graduate with a master's degree, I had to write a novel. So I wrote what became some years later my first published novel called The Sausage Maker's Daughters. And it's an exploration of sibling rivalry set in the 60s on a radical campus in the middle of the United States. And then once I got that under my belt and felt like I had a little more experience and understanding of the publishing industry, such as it is, I then went back. I then went back to this story. And through my friends that advised me, the pathologist, the physicist, and through my writing group, the other aspect of my advisors, I would take my manuscript, my whatever part of it was ready, and I would take it to my writing group. And they would say, I have no idea what you're talking about. to to am I understanding this correctly? And feeding it back to me until they were clear and I realized I was getting completely clear. And it helped my confidence to know that what I was trying to say, they were finally hearing the message. And so it took years.
Did you at one point think of toning down the science in your book?
No, I can honestly say I never considered toning down the science because the science was the reason I was writing this. And that was of the pivotal experiences that put my brain in this direction. The last one was the most important. My father was diagnosed with leukemia. And he came to my house after his first and last chemotherapy treatment. And he said to me clearly, Audrey, I don't care. I'd rather die. I'm not doing that again. So I had an experience with a veterinarian who saved my dog, who used these frequency-based approaches to heal. And so my 13-year-old golden retriever lived to 16. I said to my dad, okay, I know you haven't asked me, but if you asked me what I think you should do, I would take you to my vet.
Yeah.
He said, what have I got to lose? I mean, I had to explain it a little bit, but The net was, what have I got to lose? So off we went to the vet. And my vet made him a cassette of sounds. Okay, so these are vibrations, and they're related to the vibration of the leukemia disease microbes. But he didn't have the kind of sophisticated equipment that the scientists I studied had. So he stepped it down by octaves. It's called harmonics in physics. He stepped it down by octaves into the sound spectrum. And he gave this tape to my dad. My dad went home, immediately listened to it night and day, immediately started feeling better. And then a couple weeks later, in a couple weeks, he went back to his MDs and they said, wow, that is the damnedest case of spontaneous remission we have ever seen. And that's as good as it gets, I think, from the traditional medicine side. But my dad died years later of pneumonia. He did not die of leukemia. So that's when I thought, okay, universe, I am listening and I'm going to understand this. And even though I don't have a lot of background in physics and medicine, I'm going to understand this. And we can do that.
Mm.
That's that tunnel vision that I like to relate to.
Mm.
We can.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just asking because there's other fields, science fiction, for example, authors we had on, they often have to juggle this with, do I keep the science because it is called science fiction, not just fiction? How much do I keep? What do I need to get rid of? Because, the audience and so on. Why not? Do not underestimate your audience.
Right. Right. I was very much aware that, number one, I'm not speaking to scientists per se. I hope they read the book. I do know a bunch of scientists who are into this kind of healing that I think would read this book happily and have. But I wanted to talk to a broader audience about possibilities that we have been not exposed to, possibilities that are out there. And so I was very much aware that science per se could bog things down. That's why I love creating these flawed characters who have this interesting dynamic and are carrying a suspenseful story to a surprising conclusion. I had to balance those two aspects, but absolutely, the science was critical to me. I wanted to be able to portray it. I remember saying this to both my physicist friend and my pathologist friend. Nobody understands what you're talking about. So my job is to take what you know and put it in plain English to the extent that that is possible. And I mean, they kind of like looked at me askance, but that was my job. My job was to take what they knew and were willing to share with me and to give me feedback and to put it in the simplest English terms I could find.
Mm.
And that was a struggle.
Yeah, I can imagine. Absolutely, I can absolutely imagine. I often get the impression, maybe I'm wrong, but in the English-speaking world, it is far more advanced in so far as even scientists are interested in making the broader public understand what they are doing. Make it as simple as possible for everyone to understand what we are doing. Not always, of course, it's not always possible, but I often get the impression in the German-speaking world, make it as complex as possible, complicated as possible, so nobody understands what you are talking about.
I don't think it's just the German-speaking world. I think that exclusive language is a part of, I mean, really, medicine is conducted in Greek and Latin.
Yeah.
How many thousands of years now? I mean, there's no reason. There's no reason except that it keeps them on a certain pedestal. And people tend to say, I don't understand what you're talking about, so I'm just going to believe you. Which has become my takeaway when I talk about my book. My takeaway is this. Especially if you have a serious problem, you see as many specialists, all kinds, all disciplines as you can, and you ask questions until you understand.
Mm.
So, multiple opinions, multiple disciplines. That really, to me, would be the healthiest way to proceed with a serious problem, and
Mm.
even not so serious problems. I mean, the healthiest way. Um, and I also sense that this is becoming more and more commonly understood. You know, the fact that in the United States, we pay twice as much for the exact same treatments and medications and drugs as anywhere else on the globe, any of the other developed countries, we pay twice as much for the same thing. And how does that happen? Why have we allowed that to happen? And the answer is, especially the drug companies, which have become very, very powerful,
Mm.
very, very wealthy,
Mm.
they tend to own the politicians at all levels. They tend to own the regulators at all levels. And they contribute heavily to the medical schools. This conflict of interest is just in neon.
Yeah. Yeah.
Conflict of interest. So that's how it
Yeah.
happens.
Also, the question of public health care. I mean, I often hear, "Oh, yeah, it's free." Nah, yeah, in Europe, it's not really free because you pay with your insurance. Even if you are employed, you have an insurance automatically. So,
And that covers everything that you would need.
yeah, more or less, of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
There is a small amount you have to pay sometimes, but that's manageable. You know? Also for medication, there's a small amount you have to pay for that. But the large chunk is paid via your insurance because everyone who is employed pays his
Mhm.
insurance, and for everyone,
I see.
you know.
And does
And
the payment go to the government?
the insurance, public insurance companies,
Okay.
not the
Okay.
government. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
it's not. I mean, it's an institution which is regulated through laws and so on, which make it possible for us to have this kind of healthcare.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the government has to take care of that, of
Uh,
course. But this body makes sure in the different. I mean, they have changed this whole system a little bit. It was a bit more complicated in Austria for such a small country, and they've changed a little bit. But otherwise, yeah, even if you're unemployed, you are insured. So even if you don't have a job, you can go to the doctor and get treatment without having to pay through your nose. It's covered,
yeah.
you know?
It seems to me to be a very civilized approach.
Yeah, and I think, in my humble opinion, that's how it should work. I mean, taking care of those who can't possibly take care at the moment, no problem with that.
No, I don't have a problem with that either.
Yeah.
And I wish we had a better system, and we may someday. You know, the more these conflicts of interest are known and understood, the more we can raise our voices and gather together to shout and demand transparency, absolute transparency in everything from drug testing
Mhm.
to who is supporting our politicians and our regulators and our medical schools. All of that, we need to demand transparency.
Yeah, it's important.
Yeah, absolutely. Critical.
Yeah. Yeah, I fully agree. And it should be the people who have the vote who make decisions, not anybody else who hasn't been elected, you know?
Yeah. Oh boy. Yeah.
Yeah, but let's not open that can of worms.
That can of worms is enormous.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. May I ask, Audrey, you mentioned your writing group. How important, how helpful was it for you to have support? from the writing community?
It 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 is critical to have trusted readers. I believe it's critical. It was certainly critical for me trying to put together not only good fiction and all the aspects that create good fiction, but also solid science
Mm.
made understandable. So, so my writing group was instrumental in this, instrumental. And
Mm.
I think everyone needs to have trusted readers.
Mm. And what would be your advice for any other author out there?
Well, this is gonna sound a little cynical, so you might like it. I I really say, if you have to do it, do it. If you have to write, write. But understand it is a very tough business. It's very difficult to be heard. And so if you're expecting some kind of clamor or reward or money or so on, you would probably be disappointed. So do it if you love it. Do it if you must. And that's really what this book was all about. I just had to understand what I had seen 3 times in my own life, and I had to take what I learned and put it out there for whatever it's worth, for however far it reaches. Um, and and then I'm making a trilogy out of it, so I'm gonna bring the next step is the 1970s, which was another time in the United States where we were getting out of Vietnam, where Nixon was being thrown out of the White House. There was a lot of trauma going on. And and then I like those eras because it puts pressure automatically on your fictional characters, and pressure is what they need to make fiction hum. You know, no pressure, no story. So, that helps, and then I'm gonna move it into the, COVID era because it is medically viral based, and so I was while we were all locked up in our houses during COVID, I started to realize, "Well, wait a minute, this story really should continue into the COVID era because that's something everyone, again, will relate to, like the Great Depression, people that lived then, it's something that affects everybody. So
Mm.
that's my plan.
Mm. That would have been my next question. What can we expect? The sequel of The Human Trial, when will it be on the shelves? When can people order it?
This is the question I'm asked most often, and that's why I'm taking August off to write and do nothing but write. Um, I don't know. It depends on how easily it all comes together. I did
Mm.
start with a pretty thoroughly fleshed out outline.
Mm.
So that me ahead of the game. However, when I decided to make a trilogy out of it, I realized I have to change the ending. So, so it's not all there, but I think by the end of August I'll have a firm answer for you. Or
Okay.
kind of
Okay, that's good to know. Looking forward to more.
firm.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Audrey, is there anything else you would like our listeners to know?
Well, I've already given my takeaways and I would like to repeat them here because nobody knows your body and your mind and your emotions like you do. You're living in it and you need to listen and you need to start trusting what you're hearing. And and as I said, if you have a specific problem, I recently had a little intestinal issue and I practiced what I preached. I did go to my MD and of course um, was prescribed some drugs, which I did not use. And I also went to the homeopathic drugstore here in Los Angeles and had a consult with the homeopath. And I did what they told me to do, and it was very effective very quickly and
Mhm.
really quite cheap compared to medicine. So I really highly recommend and wish if you have a problem, you consult experts from every approach to health. You listen to them, you demand to understand, and you get multiple opinions from multiple disciplines. That to me would be the healthiest way to proceed. And that is my overarching takeaway from what I've learned about medicine and quantum physics and everything else.
Mhm. Wonderful advice. Audrey, thank you so much for joining me. It was a wonderful conversation.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I enjoyed being here with you.
Don't go away. I will meet you shortly in the green room.
Okay.
Dear listeners, we do hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. And please don't forget to like and subscribe. And we hope you will be back for another episode at Book Lovers Companion. Until next time.